Since most of you are just starting your journey of becoming an experiential marketer and understanding how to market the experience aspect of products, let me tell you how it all started for me, and then I think you'll get a sense of how this course is structured and where we are headed. Along with my colleagues, we designed this class in 1995. And it was, I believe, the very first experience marketing class offered by a major university, at least in the marketing department. This was 15 to 20 years ahead of the experience marketing craze that we now have, where everything is referred to as an experience. I believe a brief history of this course and how I got involved will help you understand the topic and how it has evolved over time. So where did it all start? Well, it first starts in 1986. In 1986, I was finishing my doctorate at the University of Wisconsin, and I was teaching an MBA class for the university over in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. And in the class, we had some students from the Harley-Davidson plant, which was really just around the corner from the location of the MBA program. And Harley-Davidson in 1986 was employee-owned. That is, the employees and the administration of the company had bought the company back from AMF. In 1969, AMF had bought Harley-Davidson, and they thought it would be a good brand to use to compete against the Japanese motorcycles, which had become a big hit in the U.S. in the early 60s. And so when AMF took over Harley-Davidson, they got out of the large motorcycle business and developed motorcycles to compete directly with Honda. Back then, Honda's campaign was, you meet the nicest people on a Honda. Here you can see that the AMF marketing campaign was the Great American Freedom Machine. And of course, you can tell by this picture from the early 70s that Harley-Davidson was marketed to a crowd that would try to choose between a Harley-Davidson and a Honda 125 motorcycle. When the Harley-Davidson people bought the company back in 1981, they decided that they would not at all compete with Honda. At that particular point in time, Honda's largest motorcycle was a 750cc motorcycle. So Harley-Davidson said that they would not produce any motorcycles smaller than 751 cc's, so that there was absolutely no product overlap between Harley-Davidson and Honda, because they did not want to compete with Honda motorcycles. And in fact, the people at Harley-Davidson were told not to refer to Harley-Davidsons as motorcycles, but strictly as Harleys or Harley-Davidsons. So the students invited the whole class on a field trip over to the Harley-Davidson plant and to look at the Harley-Davidson new models and to go through and understand where Harley-Davidson's marketing was at the time. So on the trip, I got a chance to spend some time with a couple of the executives at Harley-Davidson and a couple of the engineers. And we looked at some of the Harley-Davidson motorcycles, and I asked them, what kind of restrictions did Harley-Davidson have on the engineering department in designing new products? And these engineers, who were also MBA students, said, Harley-Davidson will allow us to do anything at all to the motorcycle as long as three conditions exist. First, it has to look like a Harley-Davidson. Now, the traditional Harley-Davidson motorcycles that we see today and were made prior to 1969 when AMF took over were large motorcycles that were built on what is referred to as a hardtail frame. Now, today they have a frame that is a hardtail frame in looks only. It is not a hardtail motorcycle, but it is a hardtail. It looks like a hardtail motorcycle, but just isn't. So the motorcycles had to look like Harley Davidsons. And when you see a Harley Davidson, it used to be you could always tell it was a Harley. Today there are lots of other brands that try to emulate Harley Davidson's look. The second thing that it had to do is it had to feel like a Harley Davidson. That is, it had to have that Harley Davidson feel when you sat on the motorcycle, and when you drove the motorcycle, it had to feel like you were driving a Harley Davidson. And then third, and very important, was it had to sound like a Harley Davidson. If you pull up to a stoplight and a motorcycle pulls up next to you and it looks like a Harley Davidson, you can really tell whether or not it is a Harley Davidson by the way it sounds. Back when Harley Davidson was first producing motorcycles in the 20s and 30s and 40s, they built what was called a V-twin engine for their motorcycles. And the engine had, and when they built it, there was a camshaft in it that was they could never figure out exactly how to get the camshaft to work right, so the engine would run smoothly. So the Harley Davidson motorcycles back then always had a sound to them as if they were not going to keep running. So in the 1980s, when we went and visited them, they said we have to keep that sound like it's going to miss in the engine, even though we now know how we would engineer it out in an instant. So when you get to a stoplight and you want to find out whether or not that motorcycle next to you is a Harley Davidson, two things. First, listen. If it sounds like the motor has a little miss in it, so it hits twice and then it misses, and it hits twice and then it misses, it might be a Harley Davidson. The other thing to look at is look at the handlebars on the Harley Davidson and see if the driver's hand is on the handlebars, you should see a noticeable vibration in the handlebars. So the person's hand is actually shaking as the motorcycle sits at the stoplight. So those were the three things that Harley Davidsons had to do, is that they had to sound like a Harley Davidson, they had to look like a Harley Davidson, and then they had to have that feel of a Harley Davidson. And I always thought that was interesting, and I had that in the back of my mind when I got my job here at UNLV, and I started to teach at UNLV in 1988. But I always remembered that deal at Harley Davidson, that these motorcycles that Harley Davidson were making had to have a particular look, feel, and sound to them. And those are three aspects of the senses that Harley Davidson focuses on as they build motorcycles. Those senses then are experiential. Well, when I got to UNLV in the early 90s, and I have here 1990, but it could have been 91 or 92, I was working as an assistant professor, and I got a call from our dean at the time, Dean Pohl. And the dean called me, and his name was Norval, and Norval said to me, I have an opportunity for you to do a consulting job for UNLV at Brookfield Zoo in Chicago. And I said to Norval, well, I said, how much does it pay? And Norval said, well, you don't get paid to do this. You're just doing it as a free job working for the university. I told the dean that I didn't think I would be interested in doing that. He told me that the provost had called him and had specifically asked him to get me to do this job. So of course then I said, well, absolutely. All right, and so the job was to go to Brookfield Zoo, spend 3 or 4 days at Brookfield Zoo, and learn about Brookfield Zoo and figure out a way to increase their revenues. Now, also at that consulting job were the people from McDonald's, because McDonald's was a great big sponsor of Brookfield Zoo, the people from the San Diego Zoo, the very famous San Diego Zoo, and the people from the Los Angeles Zoo, and of course me. And so we all traveled to Chicago. We got to stay at the McDonald's University headquarters in Oak Brook, Chicago, and we went back and forth on the McDonald's bus every day to Brookfield Zoo. And so the goal was to increase attendance at the zoo. And the good thing about spending 3 or 4 days with these people is I got to spend a bunch of time with the people from McDonald's. So I learned a little bit more about merchandising and pricing and bundling and all the things that McDonald's does really well. But then I also got to spend time with the people from the San Diego Zoo. And of course, if you've ever been to the San Diego Zoo, it is a perfect example of creating an experiential product. That is the zoo experience at the San Diego Zoo. And if you've ever been to the Los Angeles Zoo, while it's not as famous as the San Diego Zoo, is a wonderful zoo that is fairly well managed by the people in Los Angeles. So I got to spend time with those people, and I learned about how you try to create a zoo experience. So we spent a couple of days, and finally we got to meet the person who was in charge of the zoo. And lo and behold, his background was he was a zoologist. So he came in and he was talking to us about what the zoo had going on and what was neat and new at the zoo and why people should go to the zoo. So I raised my hand and I asked him a question, and I said, "Why do people go to the zoo?" Now understand that this is 1990 and there were no Animal Planet channels and all those sorts of things. And he looked at me and he said, "People go to the zoo to get educated and learn about animals." And I said, "Oh," I said, "I thought people went to the zoo to be entertained." He said, "No, they come to the zoo to learn." I said, "Okay." So then he was talking again, and I raised my hand and I said, "Well, what?" I said, at the San Diego Zoo, they have koala bears as their main attraction right now. This was early 1990, and they had just brought the koala bears into San Diego Zoo. I said, "What is the thing that draws people into the Brookfield Zoo here in Chicago?" Because downtown there's a zoo in Chicago called the Lincoln Park Zoo, and it's the home of the big gorilla exhibit, and people love to go down and watch those gorillas. And I was wondering what the key attraction was at Brookfield Zoo. And he said, "Well, our big attraction is that we have the world's best and largest aviary." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." Of course, I think that probably most of you know this. An aviary is a bird sanctuary. So they had the world's largest collection of birds. Of course, I don't really know anyone who goes to the zoo to watch birds. I'm sure some people do, but that is ordinarily when you go to the zoo, you go because you want to see other exhibits at the zoo. Think about when you go to the zoo, what's the number one thing you want to see? Maybe it's giraffes, maybe it's elephants, maybe it's zebras, maybe it's the big cats. It might even be the monkeys and other primates. It could be lots of stuff, but very few people would say, I want to go to the zoo because I want to see all their birds. So I said to him, I don't think that's that much of an attraction, and of course that hurt his feelings. He said, "We are right in the process now of finishing an exhibit called The Swamp, and it's 6,000 square feet of indoor swamp." He said, "And that is something people will want to come and see for miles." And I said, "Really?" I said, so tell me about the swamp. He said, better than that, he said, you and I will go over and I will give you a tour of it. So we went over and to tour the swamp, and when you walk into the building where the swamp is, it obviously is damp, dark, humid, and smells like a swamp. So there was a catwalk at that time where you'd walk over the top of the swamp, and we were walking through, and he'd say, oh, look, you can see the eyes of a crocodile over there. And oh, look at over here, you can see, these birds from that are in the swamp. And so we walked through the swamp, and when we got done, we got back to the meeting, and he said to me, what do you think? And I said, I think it's really a neat exhibit, but I don't know that people are going to want to come to see the swamp, since they really want to come to see animals moving and doing things. And in the swamp, you almost have to be able to hunt around to see the animals, because most animals that survive in a swamp are animals that are ambushers, and so they have learned to be very quiet and very still until their prey is right next to them. I said, what you really need is stuff that is moving and exciting. And he said, after we finish this exhibit, our next exhibit that we're going to be working on is called Sharks and Penguins. And I said, sharks and penguins. I said, now that sounds pretty interesting. I said, do you have like sharks swimming around an island with penguins on the island, and they have to swim past the sharks to get to their food? Or he said, no. He said they're not going to be together. He said, but it'll be a water-based exhibit, and we'll have penguins on as part of the exhibit, and we will have sharks as part of the exhibit. And I said I thought that would be more entertaining than the swamp. Well, but I did get a chance to spend a lot of time at the zoo and talking to the zoologist. And I think by the time I had left, that I had convinced him that part of the success of San Diego Zoo, and the people at San Diego Zoo had a strong influence on him, probably stronger than mine. The reason that the San Diego Zoo was so popular is because people go there, and not only do they see and learn about the animals, they're also entertained. And so it is a wonderful day at the zoo, and they have a lot of fond memories of the zoo. So when I got home, I thought to myself, this is an interesting area of marketing, and I think it's an area that someone has probably researched, and that there ought to be something that we can learn from this. So when I got home from Brookfield Zoo, I started to look at the literature. And one of the things that I was able to find was an article called "The Strategic Brand Concept Image Management" by some people who both I and Dr. Naylor know, Siwan Park, Bernie Jaworski, and Deborah McGinnis. And I found that article actually helped me to understand better what this concept of experiential marketing was all about. Then, of course, later on, I read the Pine and Gilmore's Experience Economy book that you're reading, and Bernd Schmidt's Experiential Marketing book. And so those books, of course, also helped form my ideas and opinions about the topic of experiential marketing. So after that, I got involved in a number of projects concerning experiential marketing. And some of those projects included jobs with a guy by the name of Ron Drake, who is now working as an experiential marketing consultant in Dubai. At the time I met him, he was an assistant arena director at the Thomas & Mack. But we did projects together at Madame Tussauds in Las Vegas, the High Roller, the Link, In 1998, I got involved with the NHRA, the National Hot Rod Association. And in 2002, I got a sabbatical to go and spend time observing the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. Now, turns out that these are all experiential marketing projects and ideas. Some other things that we got involved with is the Las Vegas Stars AAA minor league baseball team, other aspects of the Thomas and Mack Center, the Fremont Street Experience, the Mob Museum, the East Fremont Street Experience, the Downtown Las Vegas Alliance efforts to improve the experience in downtown Las Vegas, the Downtown North Las Vegas project, a Hoover Dam consulting project that involved the Visitor Center, and of course the Nevada States and Park Recreation Consulting. Through all of that, I learned more and more and more about experiential marketing every time we had a new project. Some other projects, the Las Vegas Shriners Hospitals for Children PGA Tour event, some companies, work at the Las Vegas Stratosphere and Vegas World, the Imperial Palace Auto Collection, the Emerald River Golf Course, and many others. And so over the course of the semester, I'll be talking about a number of these and other projects that we worked on as examples of good and bad experiential marketing. So in summary, I hope that this will be the most consequential class you take while you're here in college. And I do believe that for some of you, this will be a potential career-changing course.